The desert sun beat mercilessly upon Winifred Nelson's face as she squinted across the vast expanse of the Wyoming territory. The year was 1878, and she had never felt more alone or more foolish. Her father's warnings echoed in her mind. No respectable young lady travels the frontier alone. But at 22, with nothing but heartbreak behind her in Boston and the promise of a teaching position in the growing town of Sweetwater ahead, she had defied convention and her family's wishes. The stagecoach had broken an axle 10 miles back, and the driver and other passengers had opted to wait with the disabled vehicle while a rider was sent for help. Winifred, however, had grown impatient. Sweetwater was expecting her arrival tomorrow, and she was determined not to disappoint on her very first day. The driver had pointed her in the right direction, assuring her the walk was straightforward if she kept the distant mountains to her left. That had been hours ago, before the sky had begun to change from clear blue to an ominous yellowish gray. Now, Winifred clutched her carpetbag tighter as the wind picked up, sending swirls of dust dancing across the scrubby landscape. "Steady now," she murmured to herself, adjusting her bonnet, which offered little protection against the increasingly aggressive gusts. "Just keep walking. Sweetwater can't be far." But each step became more difficult as the wind intensified. The dust scratched at her eyes and throat, making her cough violently. The mountains she'd been using as her guide disappeared behind a wall of swirling dirt and debris. Panic began to rise in her chest. "Hello," she called out, her voice thin against the howling wind. "Is anyone there?" Only the wind answered, its pitch rising to a terrifying wail. The dust thickened until she could barely see her hand in front of her face. Winifred stumbled forward blindly, her skirts whipping around her legs. Isaac Ingram had seen the signs of the approaching dust storm hours before it hit. At 28, he'd spent enough years on the range to read the sky like others read books. He'd quickly rounded up his small herd of cattle and driven them into a protected draw, then secured his camp as best he could. Now he huddled beneath an oilskin tarp stretched between his wagon and a large boulder, his horse tethered nearby. The animal was restless, whinnying softly at the howling wind. "Easy, bandit," Isaac soothed, patting the horse's flank. "We've weathered worse than this." But something else caught his attention, a sound that didn't belong to the storm. A voice, human. "Hello?" The cry was faint but unmistakable. Isaac froze, straining his ears. There it came again, a woman's voice calling for help. Without hesitation, he grabbed his bandana and tied it over his nose and mouth. Pulling his hat low over his eyes, he ventured out into the maelstrom. "Hello," he shouted against the wind. "Where are you?" He moved carefully in the direction of the voice, one arm raised to shield his eyes from the stinging particles. "Please." The woman's voice was closer now, tinged with desperation. "I'm lost. Keep talking," Isaac called back. "I'm coming to you." He inched forward, the visibility reduced to mere feet in front of him. Then suddenly, a figure materialized through the dusty haze, a woman in a torn dress and bonnet, clutching a bag and looking terrified. "Thank God," she gasped, her face streaked with dirt and tears. "Give me your hand," Isaac instructed, reaching out to her. "Follow my voice and don't let go." Winifred grasped his hand without hesitation, her fingers cold and trembling. Isaac pulled her close, shielding her with his body as he began to retrace his steps back to his makeshift shelter. "I can't see where we're going," she cried, stumbling against him. "You don't need to see," he replied steadily. "Just hold tight to me, follow my voice, don't let go." The journey back to his shelter, though only about 100 yards, seemed to take an eternity. The storm intensified, howling like 1,000 angry spirits. Twice Winifred stumbled, and once she nearly lost her grip on his hand, but Isaac held firm, his deep voice a constant reassurance in her ear. "Almost there. Stay with me. One step at a time." When they finally reached the shelter, Isaac pulled her under the tarp and quickly secured the edge that had begun to flap violently in the wind. "You're safe now," he said, turning to look at her properly for the first time. Winifred collapsed onto a bedroll, coughing violently as her lungs tried to expel the dust she'd inhaled. Isaac quickly retrieved his canteen and handed it to her. "Small sips," he advised. "It'll help clear your throat." She nodded gratefully and took the canteen with shaking hands. As she drank, Isaac studied her. Despite being covered in dust, he could see she was no ordinary frontier woman. Her clothing, though practical for travel, was clearly of Eastern quality, and her hands showed no signs of hard labor. "Thank you," she said when she could finally speak again. "I thought I was going to die out there. What in God's name were you doing wandering alone in these parts, especially with a storm brewing?" Isaac asked, his tone more concerned than accusatory. Winifred straightened her shoulders slightly. "I was on my way to Sweetwater. I'm the new schoolteacher. The stagecoach broke down and I decided to continue on foot." Isaac's eyebrows rose. "Sweetwater's a good 15 miles from here, miss." Oh, the single syllable carried the weight of her miscalculation. The driver said it wasn't far. "Not far by stagecoach, perhaps," Isaac replied with a slight smile. "By foot, especially in this terrain, that's a different matter entirely." Embarrassment colored Winifred's cheeks, but she lifted her chin. "I'm Winifred Nelson from Boston." "Isaac Ingram," he replied with a slight nod. "Cattle driver, sometimes scout. Currently waiting out this dust storm with an unexpected guest." The wind howled as if emphasizing his words, and both of them glanced toward the flapping edge of the tarp. "How long will it last?" Winifred asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Isaac shrugged. "Could be hours, could be days. These spring storms are unpredictable." Winifred's eyes widened with alarm. "Days, but I'm expected in Sweetwater tomorrow." The children will understand that even the most dedicated teacher can't control the weather, Miss Nelson," Isaac interrupted gently. "And trust me, everyone in Sweetwater will know about this storm. They won't expect you until the trail's clear." Winifred sank back, the reality of her situation settling over her. She was trapped in a makeshift shelter with a stranger, a handsome stranger. She couldn't help but notice, now that her panic was subsiding enough to truly look at him. Isaac Ingram had the weathered face of a man who lived outdoors, with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often. His brown hair was too long by Boston standards, curling slightly at his collar, and a short beard covered his jaw. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, clear, blue, and direct, meeting her gaze without hesitation or impropriety. "Are you hungry?" he asked, breaking into her thoughts. "I've got some beans and jerky. Not exactly Boston fare, but it'll keep your strength up." "Thank you," she replied. "That would be most appreciated." As Isaac busied himself with preparing a simple meal on a small spirit stove, Winifred took stock of her situation. Her carpetbag, though dusty, seemed intact. Her dress was torn at the hem, and she could feel grit in every fold of fabric and every strand of her hair. But she was alive, and for that, she had this quiet, capable man to thank. "Have you been a cattle driver long, Mr. Ingram?" she asked, wanting to fill the silence with something other than the howling wind. Isaac glanced up from the pot he was stirring. "Going on 10 years now. Started as a ranch hand down in Texas when I was 18, worked my way up. These days I mostly do small drives for local ranchers, moving cattle between seasonal pastures." "And you live?" "Wherever my bedroll is," he answered with a slight smile, "though I've been thinking it might be time to put down some roots, maybe claim some land of my own." Winifred nodded, trying to imagine such a nomadic existence. The very idea would scandalize her mother, who believed a proper address was as essential to respectability as proper breeding. "And you?" Isaac asked, handing her a tin plate of beans. "What brings a Boston lady to Wyoming territory to teach school?" Winifred accepted the plate and considered how much to share. "I wanted adventure," she said finally, "and perhaps a fresh start." Isaac nodded, not pressing further, but his eyes suggested he heard the things she left unsaid. They ate in companionable silence, the only sounds the wind outside and the occasional nervous whinny from Isaac's horse. As night fell, the storm showed no signs of abating. If anything, it seemed to intensify, the wind finding new ways to probe at their shelter. Isaac reinforced the tarp with additional ropes and rocks, then laid out his bedroll for Winifred. "You should rest," he said. "I'll keep watch to make sure our shelter holds." "But where will you sleep?" Winifred protested. Isaac patted a saddle that he'd positioned at the entrance to their shelter. "I've slept on worse than this, Miss Nelson." Despite her exhaustion, Winifred found sleep elusive. The wind's constant howl, the unfamiliar surroundings, and the proximity of this stranger who had saved her life kept her awake long into the night. When she did finally drift off, her dreams were filled with swirling dust and a deep voice saying, "Follow my voice, don't let go." She awoke to silence. The abrupt absence of the wind's constant howl was disorienting. For a moment, Winifred lay still, trying to orient herself. Then she remembered the storm, the stranger, the shelter. Sitting up quickly, she found Isaac already awake, peering outside the shelter. "Good morning," he said, turning toward her. "The storm broke about an hour ago." Winifred pushed her tangled hair from her face, acutely aware of how disheveled she must look. "Is it safe to travel now?" Isaac nodded. "The air's still dusty, but the wind has died down. We can start for Sweetwater after breakfast if you're up to it." "Yes, of course." Winifred tried to straighten her crumpled dress. "I've imposed on your kindness long enough," a flicker of something disappointment crossed Isaac's face, but it was gone so quickly Winifred wondered if she'd imagined it. "No imposition," he said simply. "I couldn't leave anyone out in that storm." After a breakfast of coffee and hardtack, they packed up the camp efficiently. Isaac seemed to have a system for everything, his movements economical and practiced. Winifred found herself watching him more than she should, admiring the quiet competence with which he handled each task. "You'll ride, Bandit," Isaac said, leading the horse over. "I'll walk alongside." "Oh, but I couldn't. It's 15 miles to Sweetwater, Miss Nelson. In this heat, with the trails as they are, you need the horse more than I do." There was a gentle authority in his voice that brooked no argument, so Winifred simply nodded and allowed him to help her mount. His hands were strong and sure at her waist, lifting her as if she weighed nothing at all. The journey to Sweetwater was slower than either of them had anticipated. The storm had transformed the landscape, obliterating familiar trails and creating new obstacles. Twice they had to backtrack when their path was blocked by drifts of sand and debris. As they traveled, Winifred found herself increasingly drawn to Isaac's quiet strength and understated intelligence. He knew the names of every plant and animal they encountered, and he shared stories of the land that revealed a deep connection to the rugged beauty around them. "See those buttes to the west," he said, pointing to a formation of flat-topped hills in the distance. "The Cheyenne believe they are the homes of powerful spirits who control the weather. After yesterday, I'm inclined to believe them." "Do you interact much with the native tribes?" Winifred asked, genuinely curious. Isaac's expression grew thoughtful. "More than most cattlemen, I suppose. I learned some tracking and survival skills from a Shoshone man who worked at the same ranch as me years back, and I try to respect their territories when I'm driving cattle." He glanced up at her. "The newspapers back east don't tell the whole story about life out here, Miss Nelson." "Please call me Winifred," she said impulsively. "After sharing a shelter through a dust storm, I think we can dispense with some formalities." A slow smile spread across Isaac's face. "Winifred, then, and I'm Isaac." By midday, the sun was beating down mercilessly, and both were struggling with the heat and lingering dust. When they came upon a small creek, Isaac suggested they stop to rest and water the horse. Winifred gratefully dismounted, her muscles protesting after hours in the saddle. She watched as Isaac carefully led Bandit to drink, speaking softly to the animal in a tone that made her wonder what it would be like to have such gentle attention directed at her. The thought startled her. She had come west to escape romantic disappointments, not to indulge in fanciful thoughts about a man she'd known for less than a day, no matter how handsome or heroic he might be. "We should reach Sweetwater by nightfall," Isaac said, interrupting her thoughts as he joined her in the shade of a cottonwood tree. "Though I admit we're taking a roundabout route, the storm has changed the landmarks more than I expected." Winifred nodded, suddenly realizing that their journey would soon end, and with it, this unexpected interlude in her carefully planned life. "What will you do after you deliver me to Sweetwater?" she asked. Isaac shrugged, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "Head back to my herd." "Finish the drive to summer pasture," he paused. "Though I might stop in town for supplies first, perhaps even stay a day or two." "I would like that," Winifred said softly, then felt heat rise to her cheeks at her forwardness. Isaac turned to look at her, his blue eyes searching her face. "Would you?" Winifred met his gaze steadily, surprising herself with her own boldness. "Yes, I would." Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition, an acknowledgement of possibilities. But before either could speak further, a distant sound caught their attention. Riders approaching from the direction of Sweetwater. Isaac stood, his posture alert but not alarmed. Within minutes, 3 men on horseback came into view, their expressions shifting from wariness to relief as they drew closer. "Ingram, that you?" called the lead rider. "Marshal Cooper," Isaac greeted with a nod. "What brings you out this way?" "Looking for a missing schoolteacher," the man replied, his gaze shifting to Winifred. "Would that be you, madam? Miss Nelson from Boston?" Winifred stood, brushing dust from her skirts. "Yes, I'm Winifred Nelson." The marshal tipped his hat. "Town's been worried sick about you, miss. When the stage arrived without you and the driver said you'd set off on foot just before the dust storm hit, well, we feared the worst." "Mr. Ingram found me," Winifred explained. "He saved my life and has been escorting me to town." Marshal Cooper nodded approvingly. "Lucky thing he found you. Ingram knows this territory better than most." He looked between them, noting their travel-worn appearance. "We can escort you both back to town now." "Get you settled in properly, Miss Nelson." The arrival of the search party abruptly changed the dynamic between Winifred and Isaac. Where there had been growing intimacy during their journey, now there was a return to formality as they rode alongside the lawmen. Sweetwater turned out to be larger than Winifred had expected, a proper frontier town with a main street lined with businesses, a church steeple visible in the distance, and dozens of homes scattered around the periphery. People emerged from buildings as their party rode in, curious faces breaking into smiles at the sight of the missing schoolteacher, safe and sound. Marshal Cooper led them to a neat 2-story building with a sign identifying it as Sweetwater Boarding House. A plump, gray-haired woman stood on the porch, hands on her hips. "Well, there she is at last," the woman exclaimed. "We were about to send the whole town out looking for you, young lady, Mrs. Hamilton. This is Miss Nelson," Marshal Cooper introduced. "And you know Ingram." He found her lost in the dust storm and kept her safe. Mrs. Hamilton's expression softened as she looked at Isaac. "That was good of you, Mr. Ingram, very good indeed." Isaac merely nodded, suddenly seeming uncomfortable with the attention. "Come inside, dear," Mrs. Hamilton said to Winifred. "I've got a hot bath waiting and a room all prepared for you. The school board members will want to meet you tomorrow, but tonight you need rest." Winifred hesitated, looking back at Isaac, who stood beside his horse, hat in hand. "Thank you again for everything, Mr. Ingram," she said formally, aware of the curious eyes watching them. "My pleasure, Miss Nelson," he replied with equal formality. "I wish you all success with your teaching." And just like that, it seemed their brief connection was over. Winifred allowed Mrs. Hamilton to usher her inside, where the promised bath and clean clothes awaited. But as she soaked away the dust and fatigue, she found her thoughts continually returning to the man who had appeared out of the storm and guided her to safety. The next morning, Winifred was introduced to the 5 members of Sweetwater's school board, who seemed both impressed by her credentials and relieved that she had survived her journey. The school itself was a simple 1-room building with rows of benches and a blackboard, but it was clean and well supplied. Classes start Monday, explained Mr. Peterson, the board president. We have 28 students enrolled, ages 6 to 16. Winifred nodded, mentally preparing for the challenge ahead. Teaching children of such varied ages would require careful planning, but she felt ready for the task. "And where is Mr. Ingram staying?" she asked as casually as possible when the tour concluded. "I would like to thank him properly for his assistance." The board members exchanged glances. "Ingram doesn't usually stay in town," Mr. Peterson said. "He's more comfortable out on the range." "But I believe he mentioned to Marshall Cooper that he'd be picking up supplies at Thornton's general store today." Winifred tried not to appear too eager as she thanked them for the information. After a quick lunch at the boarding house, she made her way to the general store, telling herself she was simply being polite in seeking out Isaac to express her gratitude. She found him comparing the quality of 2 different coils of rope, his brow furrowed in concentration. He looked different in town, slightly out of place among the neatly dressed shoppers, his wilderness-honed instincts visibly on alert even in this mundane setting. "Mr. Ingram," she greeted, approaching him with more confidence than she felt. He turned, surprise and pleasure washing over his features before he schooled his expression. "Miss Nelson, how are you settling in?" "Very well, thank you. Everyone has been most welcoming." She hesitated. "I wanted to thank you again for what you did, if you hadn't found me in that storm." "But I did find you," he said simply. "No need to dwell on what might have been." An awkward silence fell between them, so different from the easy conversation they'd shared during their journey. "Will you be staying in Sweetwater long?" Winifred finally asked. Isaac shook his head. "Just until tomorrow. I need to get back to my herd." "I see." Winifred tried to hide her disappointment. "Well, I wish you safe travels then." She turned to leave, feeling foolish for having sought him out. What had she expected? That their brief connection during a crisis would translate into something more. "Winifred," Isaac called after her, his use of her first name stopping her in her tracks. "Would you?" "That is, I was planning to have supper at the hotel restaurant tonight. Perhaps you would join me." Winifred turned back, unable to suppress a smile. "I would like that very much." The hotel restaurant was the finest establishment in Sweetwater, which wasn't saying much by Boston standards, but Winifred found its rustic charm appealing. Isaac had clearly made an effort with his appearance. His hair was neatly combed, his clothes clean, and he'd trimmed his beard. The sight of him waiting for her at a corner table made her heart beat faster in a way that both thrilled and alarmed her. Their conversation over supper flowed more easily than Winifred had anticipated. Isaac asked thoughtful questions about her teaching philosophy and listened with genuine interest to her answers. In turn, she learned more about his life, his childhood in Pennsylvania, his journey west as a young man seeking adventure, his dreams of eventually establishing his own ranch. "I've had my eye on a piece of land north of here," he admitted. "Good water, sheltered valley for winter grazing. Just need to save a bit more to make an offer." "It sounds wonderful," Winifred said sincerely. "It's nothing like Boston," Isaac warned. "Life out here is hard, especially for women. The comforts you're used to." "I didn't come west expecting comforts," Winifred interrupted. "I came for a new beginning." Isaac studied her face. "You mentioned a fresh start before. Are you running from something?" Winifred, the direct question caught her off guard. In Boston, such personal inquiries would be considered impolite, but she was learning that frontier directness had its own kind of honesty. "Not running, exactly," she said carefully. "But yes, I left behind some painful memories. A broken engagement." Isaac's expression remained neutral. "His choice or yours?" "Mine," Winifred admitted. "Though it was a near thing. I discovered William, my fiancé, had been secretly courting my cousin while we were engaged. When confronted, he claimed it was merely a misunderstanding, that his intentions toward her were purely friendly." She sighed. "My parents encouraged me to overlook the indiscretion for the sake of the match. His family is quite prominent in Boston." "But you couldn't," Isaac supplied. No, not just because of the betrayal, though that was painful enough. It made me realize I'd been allowing others to determine my path, my parents, society, even William. Coming west was my first truly independent decision. Isaac nodded slowly. That takes courage, does it? Sometimes I think it was more desperation than bravery, Winifred confessed. The two aren't mutually exclusive, Isaac said with a slight smile. Some of the bravest acts I've witnessed came from desperate circumstances. As the evening drew to a close, neither seemed eager for it to end. They lingered over coffee, their conversation moving from personal histories to future hopes. When they finally left the restaurant, the night was clear and star-filled, the earlier dust storms a distant memory. "May I walk you to the boarding house?" Isaac asked. "Please," Winifred replied, acutely aware of his presence beside her as they strolled down Sweetwater's Main Street. Most of the businesses had closed for the night, though light and piano music spilled from the saloon they passed. A few townspeople nodded greetings, their curious glances suggesting that the new schoolteacher's dinner with the cattle driver would be tomorrow's gossip. Winifred found she didn't care. Something about Isaac Ingram made her feel truly seen for the first time in her life, not as a proper Boston lady, not as a suitable wife or daughter, but as herself, with all her complexities and contradictions. At the boarding house steps, they paused. "When will you return to Sweetwater?" Winifred asked, not bothering to hide her interest in the answer. "I'm not sure," Isaac admitted. "The drive to summer pasture will take several weeks, and then I have commitments through the fall roundup." "I see." Winifred tried to mask her disappointment. "But I could write," Isaac offered unexpectedly. "If you wouldn't mind receiving letters from a dusty cowhand." Winifred's smile was immediate and genuine. "I would like that very much." Isaac took her hand then, his touch gentle but sure. "I'm glad you got lost in that dust storm, Winifred Nelson," he said softly. "Though I hope you never scare me like that again." Before she could respond, he raised her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, a gesture at once old-fashioned and thrillingly intimate. "Good night," he said, releasing her hand and stepping back. "Good night, Isaac," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. As she watched him walk away, Winifred realized that while she had come west seeking independence, she might have found something equally valuable, a connection with someone who valued that independence rather than seeking to constrain it. True to his word, Isaac's first letter arrived 3 weeks after he left Sweetwater. Written in a surprisingly elegant hand, it detailed his cattle drive and the characters he'd encountered along the way. Winifred read it so many times that the paper began to wear thin at the folds. She replied the same day, sharing stories of her students and the challenges of frontier teaching. Thus began a correspondence that sustained them both through the changing seasons. Isaac's letters revealed a thoughtful, observant man with a poetic streak that emerged in his descriptions of the landscapes he traversed. Winifred's responses showed her growing confidence as a teacher and her deepening connection to Sweetwater and its people. When fall came, bringing with it the autumn roundup, Isaac's letters spoke increasingly of his plans to purchase land. By early winter, he wrote with excitement that his offer had been accepted. He would become the owner of the valley he'd spoken of once the paperwork was processed. "I find myself building not just plans for a ranch," he wrote, "but for a home. Something I haven't truly had since I left Pennsylvania a decade ago. Perhaps it's presumptuous of me to ask, but would you consider visiting when next school breaks for holiday? I would very much like to show you this place that has captured my heart." Winifred's reply was immediate and affirmative. The Christmas break would allow her 2 weeks of freedom, and Mrs. Hamilton helped arrange for a neighbor who was traveling in that direction to escort her to Isaac's new property. The journey was cold but uneventful, a far cry from her first experience traveling the Wyoming territory. When they crested a rise and the valley came into view below, Winifred caught her breath. Even in winter, with snow blanketing the landscape, she could see why Isaac had fallen in love with this place. Mountains sheltered it from the worst of the winds, a creek cut through its center, and stands of pine and aspen provided both beauty and practical resources. Isaac was waiting for her at the small cabin he'd constructed, his face breaking into a wide smile as her wagon approached. He looked different, somehow more settled, more purposeful. "Welcome to the Ingram Ranch," he said as he helped her down from the wagon, "though it's not much of a ranch yet." "It's wonderful," Winifred replied honestly. The 2 weeks that followed were the happiest of Winifred's life. Isaac showed her every corner of his property, explaining his plans for expanding the cabin, building a proper barn, and gradually increasing his small herd of cattle. In the evenings, they sat before the fire, talking for hours about books, ideas, and dreams. On her last night before returning to Sweetwater, Isaac took her hands as they sat by the fire. "I know this is sudden," he began, his voice uncharacteristically nervous. "And I know a man like me has little to offer a woman of your background and education. But these past months, through our letters and now these 2 weeks together, I've come to care for you, Winifred, more than I thought possible." Winifred's heart raced as she squeezed his hands. "I care for you too, Isaac. When we first met in that dust storm," he continued, "I told you to follow my voice and not let go. I never expected that I'd be the one who couldn't let go." He took a deep breath. "I'm not asking for an answer now. But I want you to know that when the school year ends, if you should find yourself wanting a different kind of life, a life here, with me, I would be the happiest man in the Wyoming territory." Winifred didn't need time to consider. The months of correspondence had already shown her the kind of man Isaac was, and these weeks together had only confirmed what her heart already knew. "I don't need until the end of the school year to know my own mind, Isaac Ingram," she said firmly. "Yes, my answer is yes." Spring of 1879 brought more than new growth to the Wyoming territory. It brought a wedding that joined Winifred Nelson and Isaac Ingram in the newly constructed Church of Sweetwater. The entire town turned out for the celebration, along with ranchers from miles around who knew Isaac from his cattle-driving days. After fulfilling her teaching contract, Winifred moved permanently to what was now officially named the Ingram Ranch. Together, she and Isaac built the life they had begun to envision during those long months of correspondence, a life of hard work, but also deep satisfaction, of challenges overcome together, of a love that had begun in the chaos of a dust storm and grown into something as solid and enduring as the mountains that sheltered their valley. Years later, their children would beg to hear the story of how their parents met, of how their mother got lost in a dust storm, and their father called out, "Follow my voice, don't let go." It became family legend, a reminder that sometimes the most lasting connections begin in moments of crisis, when one voice cuts through the chaos and offers not just safety, but a path to something more precious than either could have imagined alone.